Hello, and welcome back to Just a Dude podcast. It's Friday, where we dive into the stories that are shaping our world. I'm Nathan, and today's episode is all about government moves in 2025. Seems like Trump and his administration have been busy and dominating the news for the last few weeks. We're talking about the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and questioning if their cost-saving measures are about efficiency or overreach. We'll also explore President Trump's tariff strategies, a tragic medical plane crash, tax cut proposals, internal changes at the FBI and DOJ, wildfires in California, the potential closure of USAID, border tariff exemptions, protests against new policies, and the cultural event of Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans. Let's get into it. First, let's do a deep dive into the whirlwind actions of the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, as it's become known. Led by the tech mogul Elon Musk and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, DOGE has hit the ground running since President Trump's inauguration on January 20th of this year. They've claimed to save taxpayers a staggering $1 billion per day by cutting what they perceive as wasteful government spending. This means in just over 2 weeks, we're looking at a total savings of about $17 billion in taxpayer money. But how exactly are they achieving this? Well, they've started by canceling contracts related to diversity, equity, and inclusion across federal departments, saving about $145 million. They've also terminated government leases for empty office spaces, which not only cut cost, but also seems like a smart move in our increasingly digital world. On the hiring front, DOGE has put a freeze on non-essential positions, aiming to streamline government operation. But here's where it gets dicey. By focusing heavily on DEI programs, some are questioning if this is about efficiency or ideology. Critics argue that while these savings are impressive, there's potential for downside. Cutting DEI initiatives might affect workplace diversity and inclusivity in government sectors, which could have broader implications for policymaking and public service. Additionally, there's the question of whether these cuts will lead to long-term efficiency or if they're just a short-term band-aid on a much larger fiscal wound. The real test for DOGE will be in the balance between cutting costs and maintaining or even enhancing government functionality. We'll have to watch closely how these changes affect the everyday workings of government services and whether the public perceives these moves as beneficial or detrimental in the long run. In the meantime, there's a degree of feigned surprise among some folks about DOGE's actions, even though these steps were explicitly outlined during the election cycle. The apprehension seems to stem from the possibility of uncovering corruption and the potential links between politicians and this excessive spending. It's crucial that once we pinpoint this inefficiency, we hold accountable all politicians involved, irrespective of their political affiliations. The evidence of corruption within our government, as highlighted by these savings in the last few weeks, is definitely undeniable. It'll be fascinating to see how the American public responds to these revelations. Moving on, let's talk about President Trump's latest economic strategy, imposing hefty tariffs on our neighbors and one of our largest trading partners. President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada sparked immediately and significant reactions, leading to enhanced cooperation on several fronts between these North American neighbors. The tariffs were primarily aimed at addressing the issue of illegal immigration and drug trafficking, particularly the flow of fentanyl into the United States. This move, while initially met with resistance, quickly transitioned into a catalyst for negotiations and cooperation, which we believe was the main point of these tariffs in the first place. In response to the tariff threats, Mexico and Canada swiftly engaged in dialogue with the U.S. administration. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, for instance, deployed additional National Guard troops to secure the border, aiming to curb both illegal immigration along with drug smuggling as well. This was a direct response to Trump's tariff threat, showcasing how economic leverage can push for immediate action on security concerns. Posts found on X after the announcement reflected this urgency, with some users noting that Mexico's cooperation came swiftly after Trump's tariff declaration, suggesting that the threat of economic penalties had a significant impact on policy adjustments. Similarly, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded by intensifying border security measures and committing to a more robust dialogue on shared concerns such as drug trafficking. The dialogues and subsequent actions post-tariff announcements were not just about averting trade wars, but also about fostering a new level of cooperation between these North American countries. The immediate engagement from both countries' leaders with Trump underscored the effectiveness of using tariffs as a negotiation tool and tactic, even if the approach was controversial. The tariffs demonstrated Trump's strategy of using economic leverage to address non-economic issues like security and immigration. While this approach raised concerns about economic repercussions and the health of international trade relations, it undeniably led to concrete actions for both Mexico and Canada aimed at addressing U.S. concerns. This period of heightened cooperation, spurred by the tariff threats, highlighted the complex interplay between trade policy and international relations, showing how economic measures can drive policy changes in areas beyond mere commerce. However, the long-term effects on trade relationships and the balance between cooperation and confrontation remain subject of ongoing analysis and debate. Moving to a tragic turn of events, a medical transport jet crashed in Philadelphia last week, killing all aboard and causing significant damage to the surrounding area. This incident is not just a news story, it's a heart-wrenching tragedy. The plane was carrying a young patient, her mother, and medical staff when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The implications of this crash are vast, from the immediate loss of life to the broader questions about the safety protocols of medical transport services and aeronautics overall. The National Transportation Safety Board has launched an investigation, but early reports suggest that the plane experienced some kind of mechanical failure. This incident has reignited discussions about the regulation and oversight of private medical flights. How do we ensure that these critical services are safe, especially when they're often the last hope for patients in dire need? The community's response has been one of solidarity, with many coming forward to support the affected families and the neighborhood where the crash occurred. It's a somber reminder of the risks involved in medical transport and aeronautics and the need for stringent safety measures. We'll keep you updated on the NTSB's findings and any changes that might come to the industry as a result of this tragedy. Our prayers are definitely with the families of those affected. Trump's proposing no tax on tips, which would be a game changer for everyone in the service industry. Imagine keeping all your tips without the IRS taking a slice. It's also about no tax on Social Security benefits for seniors, potentially giving them a bit more financial breathing room. And there's talks of no tax on overtime pay, which could really help those working those extra hours to make ends meet. But here's where it gets tricky. The plan includes making the 2017 tax cuts permanent, which sounds great, but analysts are pointing out that the rich might see the biggest benefits from this. There's also this idea of adjusting the SALT cap, but the details are fuzzy, and while eliminating tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners sounds like leveling the playing field, how much does that actually do for the average Joe? Plus, with talks of tariffs, we might see prices go up, which could eat into any tax savings. Now remember, all this needs Congress to play ball. The political landscape is as unpredictable as ever, and while some are hailing these proposals as a middle-class savior, others are skeptical about where the real benefits will land. As we move through 2025, we'll keep an eye on how much of this actually becomes law. Next, we're seeing significant shifts within the FBI and the Department of Justice following Trump's return to the White House. Reports suggest that there's been a demand for lists of agents involved in Trump-related investigations, hinting at potential purges or reassignments. This has raised alarm about political influence over law enforcement, potentially undermining the independence of these institutions. The administration's approach seems to be one of clearing out what they view as a political bias within these agencies. This has led to protests and widespread concern among legal experts about the integrity of law enforcement. How does one maintain the rule of law if investigations can be influenced by political vendettas? On the other hand, it is the purpose of the executive office to enforce those laws and to determine how those laws are enforced. On the other side, supporters of these moves argue it's about accountability and removing corruption or bias from the system. They claim it's necessary to restore trust in these institutions, which they believe have been used to target political adversaries. This situation is a delicate balancing act between ensuring justice is served without bias and maintaining the autonomy of law enforcement agencies. It's a story we'll continue to follow closely, as the implications could reshape how we think about justice in America for years to come. Shifting gears now to a devastating natural disaster. The wildfires continue to ravage Southern California. These fires have not only claimed lives, with the death toll rising to 29, but have also caused immense property damage across Los Angeles. The images coming out of the area are heartbreaking, with entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Firefighters have been battling these blazes under incredibly challenging conditions, with high winds, dry conditions, and landscapes that become all too familiar with this kind of disaster. The response has been swift, with evacuations saving many lives, but the scale of the destruction is a stark reminder of the growing threat of climate change and its impact on our communities. This tragedy isn't just about immediate loss. It's also about the long-term effects on the region. We're talking about the displacement of thousands of residents, the environmental impact, and the economic toll on what's one of the largest economic hubs in the world. The recovery will take years, and the question of how to rebuild in an era of increasing natural disaster is on everyone's mind. There's also been significant community response, showing the resilience of Southern Californians. From local charities to national organizations, support is pouring in, but it's clear that government intervention will be crucial. Policies around land use, emergency preparedness, and climate action are under scrutiny once again. We'll keep you updated on the recovery efforts and how this disaster might reshape the future of California policy and beyond. Continuing with today's news is a significant development in foreign policy and aid: the potential shutdown of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. This move, spearheaded by Elon Musk in his role with the Department of Government Efficiency, has sparked both debate and protest. USAID has been a cornerstone of American foreign aid, working to promote global health, democracy, and economic growth in developing countries. The rationale behind this closure, according to DOGE, is to cut down on what they consider redundant or inefficient government spending. But this decision isn't without its controversies. Critics argue that dismantling USAID could diminish America's global influence in humanitarian efforts, particularly in regions where U.S. support is crucial for stability and development. The protests outside USAID's Washington building highlight the public's concern over the implications of such a policy. There's a fear that without USAID, the U.S. might lose a soft power tool in the international relations, potentially leaving a vacuum that could be filled by other nations or leading to increased global instability. Moreover, the immediate impact on the livelihoods of those employed by USAID and the programs they support worldwide is a pressing concern. Musk and the DOGE team argue that this is about rethinking how aid is delivered, possibly shifting to the private sector solutions or more direct, targeted interventions. But the debate is far from settled. This move might force a reevaluation of how the U.S. positions itself in global aid efforts, possibly leading to new models of international cooperation, or conversely, a retreat from traditional roles in global leadership. It wouldn't be a Trump administration without us talking about protests from the other side that have erupted outside the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. Sparked by President Trump's early actions in his second term, these aren't just any protests. They're a clear sign of public dissent against what many see as aggressive policy shifts. The demonstrators were vocal, chanting "workers over billionaires" and holding signs that read, "Democracy is not a spectator sport. Do something." It's a direct response to Trump's policies, particularly those aimed at reducing federal workforce and altering labor regulations. There's a palpable sense of frustration with how these changes might affect the average worker, not to mention the broader implications for labor rights and protections. One of the key points of contention is the involvement of high-profile figures like Elon Musk in these policy shifts. Musk's role in leading the Department of Government Efficiency has led to concerns about corporate influence and government decisions, especially those related to labor and economic policy. Critics argue this could skew policies in favor of big business at the expense of the working class. The protests also highlight a broader cultural divide in America. On one side, there's support for cutting what's perceived as government bloat, with some believing these actions will lead to a leaner, more efficient government. On the other, there's fears that these cuts were more about ideology than practicality, potentially dismantling vital protections and services for the sake of political gain. These demonstrations are not just about voicing opposition. They're about setting a tone for the resistance to come. They're a reminder that policy changes, especially those impacting labor, health, and civil rights, will face scrutiny and opposition. As we move forward, it'll be interesting to see how these protests influence policy, or if they'll become a regular feature of Trump's second term, like we saw in the first. One key item to remember is that voters who voted for President Trump wanted exactly what is happening. Reducing the size of government is a concept that resonates deeply with many of Trump's supporters for several reasons. Firstly, they argue that a smaller government inherently leads to less bureaucratic red tape, which in turn can foster a more dynamic, efficient economic environment. The idea is that by cutting down on government agencies, departments, and regulations, businesses can operate with more freedom, potentially leading to job creation, innovation, and economic growth. This aligns with the conservative principle of limited government intervention in the economy, where the market is trusted to regulate itself more effectively than government entities. For Trump supporters, this reduction represents a return to what they perceive as traditional American values of self-reliance and economic liberty. Moreover, Trump supporters often view government reduction as a way to tackle what they see as wasteful spending and corruption. They believe that by eliminating or downsizing government programs, tax dollars can be better allocated or returned to the citizens through tax cuts. This perspective is reinforced by Trump's narrative of draining the swamp, which implies a cleaning of government from what they consider to be inefficient, self-serving, or ideologically driven bureaucracies. For them, less government means less opportunities for political insiders to misuse public funds or push agendas that do not align with their values. By supporting policies that aim to shrink government size, they're backing a vision of government that is lean, transparent, and more accountable to the people rather than being bogged down by what they see as unnecessary government expansion. How these protests and possible legal changes play out will be interesting, but time will tell if these policies work and are legal. If you're like me, you've been counting down the days until the biggest event in American sports, the Super Bowl. While most of us probably don't have our favorite team in the Super Bowl, and if you're a Browns fan like me, probably never will, this year's Super Bowl 59 is set to be a spectacle for the ages, with the Kansas City Chiefs looking to make a history by clinching a third consecutive championship against the Philadelphia Eagles. But let's talk about more than just the game. Let's dive into the spectacle that surrounds it. First off, the location. New Orleans at the Caesars Superdome. This isn't just your average sports venue, it's steeped in Super Bowl history, hosting the event for the 11th time. The city itself is buzzing with excitement, turning the Super Bowl into a week-long festival. From Mardi Gras parades to celebrity sightings, the atmosphere in New Orleans is electric, making this Super Bowl a cultural event as much as a sporting one. Now let's talk about the halftime show, because, let's face it, for some folks, that's the only reason you watch. This year's we've got Kendrick Lamar headlining what promises to be an unforgettable performance. Known for his electrifying shows and deep catalog, Lamar's selection has fans and critics alike speculating about surprise guests, set design, and what political or social messages he might weave into his performance. It's not just entertainment, it's a moment where music, culture, and sports intersect in a massive live platform. And we can't forget about the commercials. Super Bowl ads are legendary for being the place where brands go all out, spending millions for seconds of airtime. This year's lineup includes everything from the heartwarming to the outright bizarre. There are whispers of celebrity endorsements, with rumors of everything from space-themed ads to nostalgic tributes. But beyond the laughs and the tears, there's also the economic impact. These ads drive conversations, trends, and consumer behavior for weeks after the game. So whether you're in it for the football, the music, or the commercials, Super Bowl 59 is shaping up to be more than just a game. It's an experience. Finally, the Trump administration has faced significant scrutiny for not fulfilling Donald Trump's campaign promise to end the Russian-Ukraine war by Inauguration Day. During his campaign, Trump repeatedly boasted that he could resolve the conflict within 24 hours of taking office, a claim that has now proven to be hollow. Despite these assurances, the war in Ukraine has persisted with no signs of an immediate ceasefire or peace deal in sight. Critics point out that this failure not only undermines the credibility of Trump's foreign policy approach, but also raises questions about the feasibility of his negotiation tactics. The administration's early statements and actions suggested a more conciliatory stance towards Russia, yet this did not translate into the swift resolution that was promised. Instead, the conflict has continued, with recent developments showing Russian forces still engaging in active combat and Ukraine struggling to maintain its defenses. This discrepancy between Trump's bold promises and the reality on the ground has fueled skepticism among both international observers and domestic constituents. Posts found on X have echoed this sentiment, with users highlighting the unfulfilled promise as just one of many Trump campaign pledges left unmet. The administration's new timeline of aiming to end the war within 100 days, as stated by Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, further illustrates the gap between what was promised and what has been achieved, casting doubt on the administration's ability to manage complex international conflicts effectively. While I lean to the right on most ideals, I felt this was important to make this call out as it was a promise made that has not been kept yet. But I put the caveat on yet, as I am hopeful that we can still end this war. I feel it's important to hold all politicians accountable to their promises, regardless of the letter behind their name. And that wraps up another packed episode of Just a Dude podcast. From the whirlwind of government efficiency with DOGE, to the tremors felt from new tariffs on our neighbors in China, the tragic medical transport crash in Philadelphia, Trump's tax relief plans, shifts within the FBI and the Department of Justice, the devastating wildfires that continue in Southern California, the potential closure of USAID, protests against policy changes, and the cultural phenomenon that is Super Bowl 59, we've really covered a lot of ground today. Remember, all these stories are about more than just headlines. They're about the real world that impacts our lives, our economy, and our safety. Whether it's questioning government overreach or celebrating the vibrancy of New Orleans during the Super Bowl, these are the topics that shape our discussions and our future. If you have thoughts, questions, or just want to chime in on any of these topics, hit me up on all social media, including X, where you can find me at JustADudePC. I love hearing from you all, and it's your input that really helps keep this podcast grounded in the reality of everyday dudes and dudettes like us. Thanks for tuning in to Just a Dude podcast. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more episodes where we'll continue to explore the complexities of our world, one story at a time. Until next time, keep questioning, keep discussing, and keep being you. Catch you later.